Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Senate President Ahmad Lawan has faulted the power sector privatization that birthed the 23 generation companies Gencos and 11 distribution companies Discos, insisting that the exercise was allegedly fraudulent. Addressing a roundtable on Nigeria's energy crisis organized by the Senate Committee on Power in Abuja, the Senate President painted a gloomy picture of how the national economy had been adversely impacted by epileptic electricity supply. He further stressed that the sector needed a declaration of a state of emergency where courageous decisions must be taken by government, in quotes. Meanwhile, according to reports, a nationwide blackout is imminent as electricity workers begin indefinite strike this morning. Joining us now to talk about these issues and what really is the focus should be on the power sector in Nigeria is Dr. Sam Amadi, former Executive Chairman and CEO of Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC. Good morning, Dr. Amadi.
Good morning, Sam.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the morning show again. Good to see you. Well, I'm sure you are aware of all the problems in the electricity sector, the power sector in Nigeria. NERC is threatening to revoke the licenses of the distribution companies for failing to abide by the guidelines of their engagement and also for violating the Enabling Act of 2005. Now, they've asked them to respond to queries. Do you think that it will be a good move to revoke the licenses of these, discos? And of course, when Tudun was introducing the subject, he talked about Senator Ahmad Lawan, the Senate President, saying that there's need for a declaration of emergency and that the, discos and the Gencos came on board through a fraudulent process. And you were part of that process as chairman and CEO of the NERC at the time. Now, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, first, I wasn't part of any fraudulent transaction, but essentially we are regulators and our job was to provide a regulatory framework for the privatization. And again, I say this, that we are mischaracterizing the privatization process as a fraud. I think, as fair as can be possible, the BPE conducted it within very clear procedures that by a third world country, very, very exemplary process. The problem, as I've said before, is that it's a failure. It's a failure because the design did not factor what we now know as to the limitations of institutional limitations, and of course, too much assumption on what the private sector will bring. And essentially, we adopted a wrong design, which kind of, we could have corporatized properly. The market, the Discos and Gencos were not attractive to any serious experienced energy company globally. So what we had was a rush, a Nigerian rush, gold rush now by Nigerian investors with some MOUs with trigger partners. For example, some had with Korea Electricity that had over 20 billion in assets, financial assets. But then those people have perhaps only $30 million in their account. So if you use Korean electric to backstop your own asset base, then you meet the $100 million threshold, then you win. But there's really no stakeholding by Korea Electric in that. So it was a flawed process, not fraudulent in that sense. Now, back to the issue around NERC. I think this is not a time to think about the licensing. The threat was okay because they have to live up to the market expectation. I think NERC used this as a process to begin to look at how this company should be penalized. There are a range of penalties, ranging from financial penalty to even removal of CEOs and management staff if the violations are egregious. Now, to license them means that there will be a stop in production, in supply services. Continuity is this business. So what are the backup arrangements to ensure that these guys get off and the other people take over? So that's a far-fetched one. And again, I don't think we'll be talking about the licensing many discos. It sends contagion in the air. And, the business community is like electronic head. They run. They sense threat, they all run together. So I think the language should not be moderated. The critical issue, yes, there should be an emergency, but the way Nigerians address national emergency is to think about who to fault, who to bring down. It's actually about time we totally review. In my view, the framework was simplistic, and all reforms all over the world, they're going to have crisis where your assumptions do not tally with the reality. And so you do readjustment, fundamental readjustment. That's why reform is iterative. It's a learning by doing. So there are failures in this process, but nobody has taken time to study these failures and then address. It's a failure of intelligence, in my view. This government should have stopped now to say, where do we get it wrong? I'll give you 3 examples. For example, these disco owners have clear problem of financial support. They can't finance the recovery we need. They can't finance the improvement. Today, we have close to maybe 6,000 to 7,000 megawatts could be delivered by the Gencos. But then the discos can't take them because the network is bad, because the financing of this sector is not good. And we're relying on tariff. And tariff is like a vicious circle. If there's no quality supply, then the propensity to pay is low, the metering is low, and therefore losses are high, and revenue shortfall will be huge. So I think in this cyclic, what we call adaptive crisis, a system failure, you have to address the weakest link and address them all together. So what I see missing in this conversation is that we are doing the rhetoric of saying, oh, it's a fraud, it should be scrapped. That's not the solution. The solution is to go back and set up a team. The National Assembly should set up a commission, more like an intelligence commission that sits back to analyze what went wrong and then create pathways for dealing with them. One of them is this. The discos are not capable, many of them are not capable, but you can't ask them to give up their asset. You can't just create political risk because that damages investment confidence. What you can do, therefore, is to go through a regulated process by saying, look, new benchmark of service says 3 months, 6 months, this is the deliverable. If you don't, industry annex, industry peer-reviewed process. Then if you don't, we exit you. Other takers will come in and run that system. Or government takes back and wait for institutional investors. So I think we must not allow the continued failure. The discos primarily and most of the operators are failing big time. But the solution is not a political declaration. The solution is a regulatory intervention that sort out the weak from the fairly good and, of course, those who are very good. So yes, we need to declare emergency, but it's an emergency that's based more on researched review of the problem. This is not a fraud. This is a misdesign. This is a failure in terms of policy because we made assumptions that are not true. Assumptions that instead of first fully corporatizing and commercializing, we thought we could rush to service improvement through just privatizing. And that's what we've seen from elsewhere. In China, every reform has to be first build on existing conditions, improve that condition, and then you move to perfect conditions. But we try to move to perfect conditions without dealing with existing condition, and that becomes presumptive. And that's the failure, not fraud, in my view.
So against that background of challenges being faced by Gencos and discos, which they feel require a 1.2 trillion naira bailout, we also have impending strike action by NUEE now that their 21-day ultimatum has expired. Can you give our viewers some context on this issue with regards to this strike action that the NUEE is contemplating?
Well, you know, the NUE resisted the privatization big time. And one of the things we did was to pay them off, supposedly. I was against the payout because I felt that the money we realized from the privatization should have been used to become subsidy to deal with the obvious things we're facing now. Shortfalls will happen. You can't move to a perfect market without thinking about shortfall in revenue because you can't migrate to cost-reflective tariff without improvement in service. So if we were to use a different model, which is to say sell these assets at perhaps $1 nominal fee, then commit everybody to improvement. So we got this money for the discos, which is to pay for the workers. The same workers are still in the employ of these discos, almost like 80%. And today, they are still unionized in a way under the NERC. Now, my view is very simple. Yes, we should allow workers to unionize because that's part of improving social welfare. If workers unionize, they have more bargaining power. But now, how do you deal with a unionized workforce in the electricity sector that the quality is bad, customers are not getting value, the Gencos and disco operators are claiming they're not getting revenue, and the same workers themselves are not claiming that they are not, their entitlements are not being paid, and they want to go on national strike. I think that strike should be averted by all means through negotiation, because essentially this is a very troubled time for the industry. Can you imagine the news out there that Nigeria has shut down power, that there's total blackout because the electricity workers are on strike? The government is putting so much millions of dollars or billions of dollars actually in the power sector. This is why I said the design was wrong, because government's reason for opting out to privatize was essentially to get what we call public sector borrowing requirement low by exiting public expenditure on infrastructure, especially electricity. But now government is actually arguably putting more money than they were putting before the privatization, because once you create a failure, this is a public good. Once it fails, government can walk away. Government has to keep intervening, and that should draw urgency to deal with this crisis, not in the sense of episodic and some kind of rhetoric way. No, we must admit that this failure, not just a failure, the failure is going to cost government a lot of money. Power, you can't, no government will allow this electricity sector to shut down. At the same time, you can't allow the discos to continue to do whatever they like. So I think this is a case now for a bipartisan national conversation with all the stakeholders, not just those in government now, with private sector, with those who have gone out before. The focus should be, how do we solve the underlying cause, not just the symptom? So electricity workers are right to ask for their entitlement, but I think actually they're the beneficiaries of this flawed system. They were paid out, which in my view was wrong. They should have sold the asset as it is and allow each company develop a corporate policy to deal with disengagement and all that. But government paid off everybody, and everybody's still in the saddle, and everybody's still making trouble. So this is a double loss for the country. We spent money. We didn't want to take them out. They are still there, and now they are now still bargaining in the way that they were bargaining when they were public sector. They were still asking for things that they needed when they were private, and they're still capable of shutting down the system just as they were doing when they were in public enterprise. So the question, therefore, is what did we sell for? What did we get in this bargain? It seems to me, therefore, that this calls to question the design and the methodology and the manner in which we privatize. Perhaps we should have privatized and sold the asset and the risk to investors, and then schedule the privatization process one by one. So you take one company, it's privatized, it competes with the public enterprises, so you incent new behavior, new understanding over time. The shock therapist got us into this trouble. But the idea is that, look, throw out everything at the same time. And now what we have thrown off everything. They have come back to us. NERC is still behaving like they were behaving when it was in public ownership. So it raises a doubt as to whether we made any significant progress, because we're now facing the same threat of a blackout that we could face when they were in public ownership. And that's really my worry, that we didn't get much value as was advertised. And so we need to sit down and thoroughly review this process and take bold action. I agree with Lawan, bold action, but it must be action based on understanding and knowledge about the crisis, not just about symbolic result, but underlying causes. That's what we're missing.
We are about to go on a quick commercial break and then come back to this discussion, but I'd like to ask you two questions relative to this. So first of all, if the nation is plunged into darkness, as is being threatened by the NERC, who should be held responsible? Because it can also be argued that the Minister of Power that did not respond to them for 21 days can be held responsible for that. And then on the matter of the discos that we're speaking about here, many experts often also argue that maybe we should take away disco licenses and give Gencos the power to also generate the electricity that they distribute, because they have proven to be more efficient and they're only really limited by gas infrastructure. So I want to get your thoughts on this and whether you think that's a model that can work. But we'll go on a very quick commercial break, and when we're back, we will continue with the conversation. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Dr Sam Amadi, former executive chairman and CEO of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, the NERC, is still here with us in our Abuja studios discussing a number of issues. Thank you for staying with us, Doctor. Before we went on a break, I posed a question to you with regards to who should be held responsible if our nation is plunged into darkness, as is being threatened now by the NUEE. Should it be the Minister of Power that did not respond to their requests and demands for 21 days? And then the second leg of my question touched on the idea of maybe taking away the DISCO's licenses that many experts feel should happen, and maybe just focusing on generating through the Gencos already, or giving the Gencos that ability to generate themselves because they have proven more efficient, and the only thing that's really stopping them is a lack of gas infrastructure. What are your thoughts on this, and whether this is a model that can work?
Okay, first, let's start with the issue about the strike. I think there's clearly a failure of ministerial leadership in the sector right now, clear. I mean, and we can't blame the minister, fresh, new to the sector, and some learning to do, and all this perfect storm is hitting him. So, but essentially, there is failure of ministerial leadership, so we should hold them responsible. They ought to engage with the electricity workers. I believe in the right of workers to unionize and claim benefit, because we've seen from the Oxfam report that countries that are not doing well in poverty reduction and inequality are countries with very poor labor rights. So I'm in support of labor rights because they have impact on economic development and well-being. But again, I'm also in support of government strategic engagement toward national strikes. National strikes are damaging to both the GDP, they're damaging to social welfare as well. So it's a catch-22. You allow them the right, but you have to engage them and strategically thwart it. So if that happens, if this strike goes ahead, I'll hold the minister responsible. I'll partly also hold the NERC subsidiary responsible, because as the regulator also, some of these corporate governance issues that they should also weigh in terms of advisory. But essentially, the blame should stop. The minister carries the blame because he's the presidential manager of this sector, and this is one of the things they should show leadership. Leadership that is persuasive and influential. That's not happening. Again, back to the question of what should be done to DISCOs. Like I said, I'm not against withdrawing license. I'm against withdrawing it in a political manner. I want a withdrawal based on industry-reviewed indicators that process and people see the failure, and so that investors out there will know this is not nationalization by other means. Because part of the way you can nationalize, either you give very low tariff, either you give very high service condition, or either you just intervene and take over. So constructive, if you intervene in the manner people are advocating, it will be taken as a constructive nationalization, and that's be dangerous for investment. But can the Gencos do better? People are just comparing apple and orange. Look, the Gencos have the softer part of this game to play. They invest in the network. They are covered by a risk guarantee. The bulk trader covers their risk, so they can do a better job, marginally better than the DISCO. The DISCOs really require much more, greater skill in change management, more investment with longer lag of recovery. The problem we have is that we have short money, quick money. People borrow from the banks to acquire these assets, 100%, some of them, whereas the rule says they should have bought it with their own asset and then go to the banks to finance improvement. If the DISCOs don't improve their network, they can't supply good services. There's about 6,000 megawatts now to be received from the network. The DISCOs can't take it because they have no investment that can support that. Again, metering. The customer care is still very poor. Therefore, the DISCOs have failed. But I don't think Gencos necessarily will do better. What I think, some people have argued that we should maybe bundle the network. And let me say this clearly. The problem of unbundling is that you create coordination problem. Unbundling is good and easy in jurisdictions where you have improved capacity, you have grown intelligence. Today we're still using telephone and GSM for SCADA services. So this is actually, we rushed this process. Probably we shouldn't have privatized the DISCOs, and then we have to sit down and work hard to solve it. No quick answers, no quick fix here.
Thank you very much, Sam Amadi. Quite a long history with the management of the power sector, from the days of the commercialization of NEPA, as the power company was known then, to PHCN, and now, we have all these issues still unresolved. We thank you very much for joining us this morning.